Hello and welcome to this podcast, Courts on Climate Change. It's an opportunity for Councillor Courts, the leader of Solihull Council in the UK, to share his thinking on, well, frankly, exactly that, climate change. We're recording this programme a few days before COP27, the global climate conference taking place in Egypt. My name's Nick Booth. I'm here to sort of keep things going, ask the questions, try and have a mind to what you as the listener might want to have asked. So with me today is obviously Councillor Ian Courts. Hello, Ian.
Hello.
Hello. And joining us too is Anne-Marie Atfield. You are, am I right, the low carbon project manager for Solihull Council?
Yes, that's correct.
Hello. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
As a way of introduction, Ian, it occurs to me, in fact, we were talking just before we started recording, the range of things on your desk, on your agenda as a leader of a council. Why is it that you choose to make a podcast about this one thing?
Well, it's a subject I've been interested in since 1994, I think it was, my first speech. You could dust that down now and you'd find very little of it. The world has changed. It's a problem that will go on when all the other crises have disappeared. Frankly, it's a subject I want people to keep thinking about. Personally, in their day jobs, we've got to keep this focus, as well as do all the other million things we have to do. That's my responsibility, is to keep people's mind on this, aware that we have all sorts of other problems to deal with, and I want that to happen.
And do you know why you, Ian Courts, in the 1990s decided this?
I've always been interested in environmental matters. I'm interested in wildlife. I've travelled quite a lot. It's been a good education for me. I'm seeing what's happening around the world. You know, glaciers are disappearing. Wildlife is changing rapidly. You know, what mankind is doing to this planet is difficult, shall I say, and we need to do whatever we can to improve the situation. I mean, global warming, you know, most people still think, you know, it's the crisis. But Question Time the other day, there was someone on there who actually said it's about weather, isn't it? And it's all about these things would happen anyway. And I think the audience was stunned into, can people really think like this? But they do.
And Anne-Marie, you do this for a living. You are a council officer working on climate change. How come you ended up doing this?
Similar story, really. I've always really been passionate about the environment. It started as one of those kind of, you know, sort of young girl things where it was something that I really became very interested in. I've always maintained that interest. I think I'm really passionate about climate change and sort of what we can do in our everyday lives to try and mitigate our impact on the planet, and that does go beyond climate change. It goes on to the other areas of, you know, just how our behaviour impacts on the planet. So yeah, that's really where I come from.
Lovely. And just for the listeners, so Ian is an elected politician, Anne-Marie is a paid officer. One is really, it's your job, Ian, to think about policy and ideas and direction, and Anne-Marie, it's your job to think about how that happens, I guess, up to a point. So let's just think about the timing of this. So as we're going into COP27, for the last 13 years, the UN has published this, what they call the emissions gap study, which is every year they publish a report, which is basically the difference between the rhetoric and the reality of what governments are saying. And this year, this week, just a few days ago, they said, Ian, that there is no credible pathway to keep the rising global temperatures below that threshold we've been hearing about for years of 1.5 degrees centigrade. So they're essentially saying that opportunity has gone. What do you make of them saying that?
Well, are we just going to accept that it's going to continue to get worse? I mean, COP is the most important international event that's happening simply because it brings so many together to talk about this subject, and I hope it elevates it in the minds of the public. But the point I always make, and one of the reasons I'm not massively keen on the words net zero, is people start thinking it's your job to think about net zero. Well, we've all got a job to think about decarbonisation. We've all got a job to do to improve the planet, as well as keeping people fed, looking after the vulnerable and all those things. And my firm belief is the narrative needs to change towards saying there are real benefits about taking action on climate change. There are real benefits. And, you know, there are many in terms of things like air quality, improving air quality, in terms of fuel poverty. You know, this is the approach that we increasingly need to take, nationally, I believe, and, you know, get everybody to understand that it's not just a theoretical goal. This is a way of life that we've actually got to start thinking about. Now, okay, estimates are estimates, and I don't know whether we've missed the boat or not. What does that mean? Are we going to not do anything? Well, of course it doesn't. For one simple reason: if floods happen, we have to deal with them. You know, if people are cold and energy isn't there, we have to deal with it. So, you know, that's the pragmatism about it. We need to take action, whatever the situation.
And you've already touched on some things there. I think thinking it's a year since you sat down and made your first of this series of podcasts, and it's been quite a year, I think. I mean, you mentioned floods in your own ward.
In my own ward, it was, we had hundreds of homes which were affected, and frankly, it was, you know, heartbreaking. And what was really interesting was, you'd expect if you live near the river or a big, but this was people living a long way away, and it was because the sewers just could not cope, you know, and therefore manholes popped and water came through people's houses, and they were halfway up a hill, just totally unexpected. And that's what we're seeing. All these events are just unexpected, and each nasty situation seems to be different, and it's predicting what's going to happen next is very difficult.
And as the UN was saying, we're reaching a point where we not only do we need to try and prevent this, but we actually have to start changing the way a place like Solihull is to be able to cope with the consequences of it. Is that right?
Well, that's what you call resilience. And yes, we need to start thinking, and indeed that is what's going on, to think, where do we put the water when it comes in, you know, quantities we can't cope with? No easy answers to this. Obviously, the first priority is to protect people, but there are, that's what we have to do in their homes, and indeed that's what we're going about. But it's not easy.
And Anne-Marie, we've had a bonkers summer of extreme temperatures as well.
Yes, that's right. And, you know, we are expecting we'll see those hotter, warmer, wetter winters and hotter, drier summers. And, you know, if the last year is anything to go by, it's really demonstrated the kind of severe effects we may be seeing in the future. I mean, certainly with those high temperatures, there's risks not only to the environment but to people's health. You know, with flooding, there can be risks to people getting to work or whatever, so that it really does affect every aspect of society. So it's really important that we choose to act now.
So but before we move on, I want to talk about this in lots of detail, but there's also the thing that weighs heavily on everybody at the moment is cost of living and fuel energy prices. I mean, who wants to talk about where you're at in terms of being able to mitigate that or support people with it, and how that ties in with your environmental work?
In terms of cost of living, I mean, we do a myriad of things to help people move forward on this. I mean, clearly we don't have masses of finance. What we try to do is help people through the various sources, you know, of looking for the best energy supplier and so on. And we do that usually electronically, but through every media we can. That's a job we have to do, and we'll need to continue to do. And it's unfortunate that, of course, you know, with the war that Putin has unleashed, which he doesn't seem to care at all about the consequences, I mean, that's ratcheted up energy prices, ratcheted up cost of living. And, you know, at the moment, we don't see an end to it. So we have to help the best we can. But in the longer term, of course, what we know is dependence on fossil fuels has to go, and by hook or by crook, we've got to move in that direction.
And if you start, is there work going on around? Is it called retrofitting? What is retrofitting actually, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, so retrofitting is around improving people's either the home or their building and improving their energy efficiency. So that could be something like putting insulation on the walls, or it could be, you know, anything from that to having solar panels on the roof or a heat pump. And as a council, we work with a charity called Act on Energy, who are a independent charity, and they provide free advice, impartial advice to all residents should they want it, and they can get in touch with Act on Energy and get that advice. And part of our role as a council is to kind of capitalise on these funds that are out there at the moment and help our residents access funds around retrofit and improving their energy efficiency. And obviously that's got a real dual benefit because, you know, we're improving the environmental performance, yes, and that's partially why the funds are there, but really with the cost of living increase, if people can reduce the amount of energy they use, it really will really can have a material help for residents within the borough.
And is that something any resident from Solihull listening to this, is that something they can get in touch with you about? What can they do around that?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's on the Your Future Solihull website. You can link through to Act on Energy, and even if there's a group of people that will be eligible for those grants, and they can access that through there. And there's everybody else is eligible for the support and the information that's there, so you can get in touch and get that information and support and tips on how to reduce their energy use and improve their environmental performance of their home.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so is this something that you should be targeting? Should you start with the poorest communities?
Absolutely. Retrofit's one of the most important things that we need to do. At regional level, the West Midlands Combined Authority has bid for funding, and we've benefited from some of that for the region, but it is a very large job. One of the things I keep pushing for, as do others, is the need for a more stable funding base for retrofit, because at the moment money tends to come out, well, here it is, and you got 6 to 12 months to spend it. But what we are going to need to do, if we're going to retrofit at scale, and scale is what this is all about, we actually need to build the skills base. You know, small business is not able to take people on without knowing that business future is going to be there. So if they know there is a 3 or 5 year funding platform, they'll take people on so they can capitalise on the opportunities that are there. And that is really important. It's not something we've got government to acknowledge yet, but it's one of the most important things that we're pushing for. There are other aspects to this. It's easy to say, well, government should put loads of money. Yeah, and indeed, we want more funding that way. But in all of this climate change action, we need to look at scale. We need to mobilise for scale. But we need to know how we mobilise for scale. And retrofit is a good example where you could do lots of things, and some of them you can spend a lot of money and not achieve much of a result. And in other cases, you don't need to do very much to actually achieve quite a good result. So one of the things that we're piloting in the Combined Authority is neighbourhood retrofit neighbourhoods to see what we can target will be the most effective, because what we want is the best value for every pound we spend, because realistically there isn't going to be enough money to go around and we don't want to waste it. And but retrofit, it's about housing is about a third of emissions, I think it is, so that's got to be one of the most important things we tackle. But it's not only the scale of it can make homes more comfortable, and indeed we hope will target fuel poverty, and particularly in the current crisis of high energy costs.
And is that business of working at a neighbourhood level, is that simply about economies of scale? You can do lots of houses at once, or is there something about neighbourhoods as well?
It's more than that. I mean, certainly it is about economies of scale, but many people actually don't want to have their houses retrofit because of the intrusion. And one of the big skills in this is managing teams at scale, for instance, to be able to help people with their thinking of what would be best for their home. And because you can have a row of identical houses, but they'll all be different, because, do you know what? We all like to do things in our homes that are different. So it's about what techniques, maybe what tools will create the best output.
Yeah. Right. We're just going to pause there because we thought we were going to record a single podcast that was about half an hour long for you, but this conversation is going on a bit, but in a good way. So we're going to split it. So that's you listening to the setup, what is the problem? And the next episode will be where some of the answers are.